All right, ready to dive into some more brain stuff? This time, we're tackling Antonio Damasio and his work. You've shared some excerpts from Amelia Bereal's book, Minding Damasio, and I gotta say, her back and forth with his theories, super relatable.
Yeah, it's kind of like you love his ideas, but then he throws you a curveball. That's Damasio for you. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. Bereal actually hits on something really key about him, especially in his book, Self Comes to Mind. He's not afraid to just like completely rethink his own ideas.
Yeah. He's like, all right, scrap that. Let's start over. It's refreshing, honestly. Like, hey, everyone, science is messy. We're all figuring this out as we go. But what was he so unsure about? Why'd he want to hit the reset button?
Well, he started to feel like focusing just on consciousness was kind of a trap. I mean, it's such a huge, loaded term. He wanted something more grounded, more based in biology. And that's where the concept of self comes in.
Interesting. So less about the mysteries of the universe and more about like what makes you you.
Exactly. And here's the big shift. Damasio doesn't think of the self as this like fixed thing. He sees it as a process, always changing, always interacting with your brain, your body, the world around you. He even compares it to a house, with all these different floors. Each floor represents a different level of self.
Okay, so it's not just one me up there making all the decisions. It's more like a bunch of different me's all working together.
That's the idea. And he actually defines these different levels. There's the proto-self. Yeah. This one's like the most basic level, kind of hanging out down in the brainstem. That's the part of your brain that controls all the essential stuff. Breathing, heartbeat, keeping you alive.
So the proto self, that's like the OG self, making sure we don't just like drop dead.
Exactly. And then you've got the core self, which is a little more complex. This is the you that sort of pops into existence when you interact with the world. You see a beautiful sunset, hear a song you love, boom, core self activated.
So these core selves, are they kind of like these little bursts of awareness, always flickering in and out as we experience stuff?
Yeah, think of it that way. You listening to us right now, that's your core self, engaging with what we're saying, with this information. It's fleeting, but it's built on that deeper foundation of the proto-self, that constant hum of your body just doing its thing.
Okay, so we've got these different layers of self, the proto self, the core self. But where do feelings fit into all of this? This is where Damasio really throws us a curveball, doesn't he?
He totally changes how we usually think about feelings. We tend to see feelings as these really complex things happening in the thinking part of our brain. But Damasio says, nope, let's dig a little deeper. He points to the brainstem, and specifically this part called the medulla oblongata.
Which basically, that's like the mission control for all the really important stuff, right? Breathing, keeping your heart beating.
Exactly. And that, Damasio says, is where feelings begin. Well, not just any feelings. He calls them primordial feelings. They're not about something specific, like, say, the joy of acing a test or the fear of, I don't know, a bear.
Okay, so what are they about? If they're not about anything in particular, like what am I even feeling in that case?
They're about, well, the most basic experience there is.
Yeah.
The feeling of just existing. It's like, even before we're aware of the world outside, before we even have thoughts, memories, we have this primal sense of I am. And that's the realm of primordial feelings.
Wow, that's kind of blowing my mind. So before we're even aware of like feeling happy or sad or scared, there's this even deeper layer of just, I guess, being.
Yeah, it's a totally different way to think about it.
Yeah.
And it all connects back to that proto-self we were talking about. It's like the foundation that everything else is built on.
So primordial feelings, that's like the baseline hum of existence, the feeling of being alive before we even get to all the complicated stuff of being, us.
You got it.
Mm.
And it gets even more interesting. Damasio also talks about background feelings.
Hold on, wait, more feelings. I'm with you, but we need to like define these terms carefully because we use feeling in a lot of ways, right? Like we talk about emotions, like I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel angry, but we also say things like I feel the texture of this fabric or I feel a need to stretch my legs.
You're right. Feeling can be kind of slippery that way, but Damasio's definition of background feelings is really specific. So first of all, they're not emotions in the usual sense. They're not about a specific object or situation.
So not like I'm afraid of that scary movie or I'm excited about my birthday.
Right. Background feelings are more like your body's own internal weather report. They reflect the overall state of your body at any given moment.
Oh, I like that. Like your body has its own mood ring. So instead of being about something out there, background feelings are about what's going on in here.
Exactly. You might have a background feeling of tension because, you're stressed about a deadline. or a background feeling of ease because you're relaxing on a beach somewhere.
And these background feelings, they're constantly changing, right? Like now I'm suddenly aware of my shoulders being kind of stiff from sitting here talking about brains all day.
That's it. Damasio even describes it as this constantly shifting body landscape.
Mhm.
It's always there, influencing our experience, even when we're not really conscious of it.
Okay, so we've got these primordial feelings, this very primal sense of simply existing, and we've got background feelings, our body's always updating status report. But how does this all connect to consciousness? Is Damasio saying that these feelings are the same thing as being conscious?
That is the question, isn't it? And to answer it, we need to talk about what Damasio calls neural representations. That's how he proposes we get from those physical sensations, those primordial and background feelings coming from the brainstem, the mental experience of feeling. But before we get there, maybe we should touch on how these background feelings might actually influence how we understand and interact with the world around us.
Okay, so we've got these different types of feelings, these primordial feelings and these background feelings, but how do they actually affect how we see the world?
So some philosophers, and this is interesting, they say that any feeling, to be a real feeling, has to be about something, like fear. You're afraid of something,
Yeah.
or happiness.
Yeah.
You're happy about something, right? And that aboutness, that's what they call intentionality. But when we start thinking about those background feelings, it gets a little tricky.
Yeah, like if I just feel kind of, I don't know, on edge or restless, it's not always about one specific thing.
Exactly. And this is where Damasio, this is where things get really cool. He's saying maybe even if those background feelings aren't about a specific thing, they're still shaping how we experience, how we interact with the world around us.
So even if I can't put my finger on why I feel restless, it could still be like affecting my decisions, how I see things, my whole mood.
Exactly. And to explain that, we got to bring in another one of his big ideas. This one's a mouthful, neural representations. It's his way of explaining how we get from those physical sensations, from those primordial feelings and those background feelings, all that stuff coming from the brainstem, how we get from there to the mental experience, to actually feeling something.
Okay, so neural representations, break that down for me. Is that like a picture in my brain of a feeling?
Think of it more like a blueprint or a schema.
Mm.
Damasio calls them dispositional representations. It's like your brain has all these patterns, right? All these pre-programmed patterns, and when something triggers them,
Like a certain feeling coming from the body.
exactly, when that happens, bam,
Yeah.
it activates the matching pattern in the brain, and that's what creates the feeling, the conscious experience of that feeling.
So my brain isn't making a literal picture of, say, a knot in my stomach because I'm nervous. It's more like it's got this pre-existing pattern for nervous, and that gets switched on when those signals from my stomach come in.
You got it. And it's interesting, Baril, the author we've been talking about, she connects this to another philosopher, a guy named Mark Johnson. He talks about something called image schemata. And it's a really similar idea. It's this idea that abstract thought, like the way we think about stuff, it actually comes from those physical experiences,
Yeah.
from those patterns that our brains have learned over time.
Okay, so much to think about here. I mean, we've got these different levels of feeling, these neural representations connecting our bodies and our minds, this whole idea that even the tiniest sensation in our bodies is shaping how we experience the world. It makes you realize just how much is going on under the surface, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Damasio so fascinating. He makes us really rethink what it means to feel, to be conscious, to be a self. It's not just happening in our heads. It's this whole dynamic interaction. Our brains, our bodies, everything around us, all playing together.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around, that's for sure. Well, to everyone listening, we've thrown a lot of big ideas your way today. Hopefully, you're walking away with a little more awareness of that incredible connection between your body and your mind, and maybe a little more curiosity about this whole self thing. Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you next time.